Good afternoon. My name is Eleanor Yick, and I am the current president of the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley, which covers the cities of Campbell, Los Gatos, Montecito, and Saratoga, and is the sponsor of this pros and cons event. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all in attendance for this event. The League of Women Voters is a national organization that provides voter services that are nonpartisan and does not endorse or oppose any political party or candidate. But we do advocate when we have studied an issue such as healthcare and have developed a position statement on it. Today's presentation, the slides have been compiled by the League of Women Voters of Cupertino-Sunnyvale and the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley. The team members presenting the pros and cons are from the League of Women Voters of Southwest Santa Clara Valley. Our team is Sophia Cow, our IT webinar director, myself, Eleanor Yick, president, and Terry Zacconi, chair of our pros and cons. This presentation will last approximately 60 to 70 minutes. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our website and other social media sites for future viewings. Your attendance confirms your permission to be recorded. The League of Women Voters, as I mentioned, has two distinct roles: voter services, which is what we're doing today, where we provide impartial, nonpartisan information. The League also does advocacy, again, when we have studied a particular issue and developed a position statement on it. Background in preparing for this pros and cons presentation. How do we prepare these? League members research each proposition, consulting many sources, including the actual filing documents, and then write up these pros and cons. This webinar, as I mentioned, is scheduled to last approximately 60 to 70 minutes and is divided into 3 parts. First, we'll do the 12 state propositions, which will last about 50 to 55 minutes. Then we'll do the 3 county measures, Santa Clara County measures, which will last another 12 to 15 minutes. And lastly, the 3 local measures. 2 of them are for Los Gatos residents, and 1 of them is for residents of the Campbell Union High School District. Those in attendance can decide to watch the whole presentation or just certain parts. Remember, this recording will be posted to our website. Also, there will be a short break between the state propositions and the county measures. Due to time constraints, only a limited number of questions will be answered. If you wish to submit a question during this event, you need to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please click on the chat icon, type in your question, and hit submit or return. Only the panelists or presenters will be able to view the questions. If time permits, the presenters will answer 1 or 2 questions on the more complex propositions. Now, what is on your ballot? California voters, in addition to voting on candidates, are often asked to vote on proposed new laws called ballot measures. Now, these ballot measures can be for the whole state, in which case they're called propositions, or just for a local community, and then they're called a measure. They typically need over a 50% yes vote to pass. There are 2 ways that state propositions can be put on the ballot. First, they can be put on by the state legislature. Secondly, they can be put on by citizens who go out and collect enough signatures using the initiative process to get it placed on the ballot. Local measures can be put on the ballot by the local town or city or county council. The League of Women Voters, again, the general election in November on November 3rd. You'll be dealing with federal, state, and county local elections. You'll be dealing with the 12 state propositions, the 3 Santa Clara County measures, and the 2 local measures. Again, where do we get our information? Primarily, the California Secretary of State Registrar of Voters, the League of Women Voters of California, the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters, Voters Edge, Ballotpedia, and local measures, you can consult your local town or city clerk. Our first proposition, Proposition 14. It's an initiative and the title is Stem Cell Research Bond Initiative. What is the question? Should the state issue $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds to support continued stem cell research? A little bit of background. Proposition 71, which passed in 2004, was a $3 billion bond measure supporting stem cell research. California at that time was on the cutting edge. This ballot measure in 2004 created the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine to oversee grants for scientific research, treatments, clinical trials, construction of a research facility, and college internships. Those Proposition 71 funds have nearly run out. What would Proposition 14 do? It would allow continued funding of grants to support research and development of treatments. It would set aside specifically $1.5 billion for treatments for brain and central nervous system diseases. And it would make changes to the Institute to improve patient access to stem cell treatments. The fiscal effects: the total state repayment costs of $7.8 billion paid at $260 million per year over the next 30 years. Supporters. Again, when we come to these particular pages in our presentation, we generally list the top 2 or 3 organizations or people who supported or opposed the measure, and they signed on to the original document. I will just maybe mention 1 or 2, or you can look at it yourself and see them. And when you see those supporters and opponents, ask yourself, well, am I familiar with this organization? And if I am, do I agree with their work? Or do I see an organization that I don't agree with, and that might impact my decision? What supporters say about this measure? First of all, they say California's stem cell funding has led to significant advances in treatment and cures, including over 2,900 medical discoveries. This proposition is supported by over 70 patient advocate organizations. It will increase patient access and affordable treatments. It prevents the cancellation of ongoing institute studies. It establishes a training program, and Prop 14 will contribute to the rebound of California's economy as we attempt to emerge from this COVID-19. What do the opponents say? Opponents say state funding is no longer necessary since federal stem cell funding restrictions ended in 2009. They claim that previous funding has not yielded the promised results for treatments or economic benefits. They feel there's been a lack of legislative oversight of public funds. They claim that there's a conflict of interest between the Institute and the institutions who are receiving funding. And independent analysts have questioned the management, integrity, and transparency of the Institute. And while we're on this slide, and you'll notice it with every proposition, you'll notice at the bottom it said these arguments are by advocacy groups. They may or may not be accurate or true. When different organizations sign on to either support or oppose a proposition, they're trying to convince you to either vote yes or vote no. And these are their arguments. So they're not always totally accurate. You have to read them carefully. Again, this is another slide we'll come to with all of the propositions, and you'll see who are the top 5 donors if they're listed. Sometimes they're not, or sometimes it's organizations. You can notice there, for example, the supporters of this one, Dagmar Dolby, has contributed $2 million. The Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation has contributed $1 million, and you can see the other 3 listed there. The total from all donors as of 9/20/20 is $6.6 million, attempting to pass this proposition. Opponents, we have none listed, and we have 0 listed for the amount of money that's been raised, which would tell me there hasn't been a lot of opposition. There is some opposition, but not as much as the supporting side. Bottom line, what does your yes vote mean? Your yes vote means that the state can sell $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds, specifically for stem cell research and development of new medical treatments. A no vote means the state cannot sell the $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds. This requires a majority vote to pass. Our next proposition, Proposition 15, is another proposition that you'll be hearing a lot about in the newspapers and on TV and social media. It's sometimes known as the Split Roll Commercial Property Assessment Initiative. It's sometimes called the Schools and Community First Initiative. What is it about? Again, you'll notice on this slide that I have some of it in blue and some of it in red. What you'll notice sometimes is that what's in blue is kind of being used as an introduction to the actual question. And in this case, the actual question is, shall commercial industrial property assessments be adjusted annually to market value, and the additional revenue be used to fund local government and schools? A little bit of background. Those of us who've lived in California for a long time are very familiar with Proposition 13 that passed back in 1978, on which our property taxes are based. Under Prop 13, the assessed values are adjusted to market value only when the property changes ownership. All real property, residential, commercial, private, or corporate, is treated the same. A fact is, some commercial property has rarely or never changed ownership since 1978 and is now assessed way below market. And that is what the crux of this proposition is about. What would this proposition do? Commercial real property would be reassessed annually to market value and taxed at 1%, which is the same current tax rate. This proposition would make absolutely no changes to any residential rental, or agricultural property, or property even owned by small commercial property owners. The additional property tax revenue would go approximately 60% to local government entities and 40% to K-12 schools and community colleges. Fiscal effects. After phase-in, and it does allow for a couple of years for this to be phased in, Proposition 15 would generate between $8 and $11 billion of additional property tax revenue annually, with again, 40% going to schools and 60% to cities and so on. Supporters. Notice maybe the top 2 or 3. Opponents. And again, ask yourself, why are these people supporting this? Why are these people opposing it? What do the supporters say? They say companies like Disney, Intel, and Chevron should pay property taxes based on market value, just like most homeowners and businesses do. This proposition keeps protection for homeowners, renters, and farms. It will restore $8 to $11 billion a year that can be given to our local government entities and schools. 10% of the wealthiest businesses will provide more than 90% of this revenue. Another important point, this measure reduces the taxable value of each business's equipment by $500,000 starting in 2024. Businesses with less than $500,000 of equipment pay no taxes on those items. All property taxes on business equipment are eliminated for California businesses that meet certain rules and have 50 or fewer employees. What do the opponents say? The opponents say a split roll property tax will increase pressure on businesses that are already finding it hard to make ends meet. These people fear if businesses lose Prop 13 protection, the homeowners will be next. Additional costs will ultimately raise prices. They claim it will make it harder for people to start small businesses, will require a huge cost to administer, and Proposition 15 will hollow out California's economy in a very short time. California will be unable to attract new jobs. Campaign finance, you'll notice at the bottom, the total is $41.2 million. Total for the opponents, $31.0 million. The top supporters over here, California Teachers Association, a labor council, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Top opponents: California Business Roundtable, California Business Property Association, California Taxpayers Association. Again, ask yourself, why are these people supporting this? Why are these people opposing it? And which side do I agree with? Bottom line, a yes vote means that the assessed value of commercial real property will be adjusted to market value annually. Residential, residential rental, and agricultural property and small commercial properties are exempted. A no vote basically means that property tax structure stays the same. Commercial property assessments will continue as is, adjusted to market only when ownership completely changes. Proposition 16, another controversial proposition that you'll be hearing a lot about if you haven't already done so. There are many editorials and op-ed pieces that are being written about Proposition 16, those opposing it and those supporting it. It says, allow diversity as a factor in public employment, public education, and contracting decisions. The question basically is, shall Proposition 209 be repealed? Now, what was Proposition 209? That became part of the California Constitution, and it bans affirmative action policies and programs that give preferential treatment based on race, ethnicity, and sex in the operation of public employment, public education, and public contracting in California. Background. State and federal constitutions provide all people equal protection. Passed in 1996, Proposition 209 prohibits affirmative action policies and/or programs here in California that discriminate against or give preferential treatment to based on race, sex, or ethnicity. What would this proposition do? Basically, it would repeal Proposition 209, which passed in 1996 and became Section 31, Article 1 of the California Constitution. And it eliminates, if it does that, eliminates the ban on using affirmative action that gives preferential treatment based on race, ethnicity, or sex in the operation of public employment, public education, and public contracting. Fiscal effects, they really don't have any estimate at this point in time. Supporters, look at the main supporters, look at the main opponents. What do the supporters say? The supporters say California is the world's 5th largest economy, but many hardworking Californians don't share in that prosperity, particularly low-wage earners and people of color and women. It says Proposition 16 means equal opportunities for all Californians. California is just one of 9 states that bans affirmative action. Colleges and universities cannot and will not use racial quotas to fill their classes and achieve diversity. That was actually ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And lastly, 25 years of both qualitative and quantitative data demonstrates that race-neutral solutions cannot fix problems steeped in racial discrimination. What do the opponents say? The opponents say repealing Proposition 209 repeals the prohibition of discrimination based on race, color, ethnicity, or national origin. Voting no on Prop 16 means to disallow considering race. Affirmative action has always been legal in California, but not those policies that give preferential treatment to any particular group or discriminate against any particular group. If more spaces are made available for the underrepresented, they must come from the overrepresented. This is discrimination in reverse. Let's not perpetuate the stereotype that minorities and women can't make it on their own unless they get special preferences. And a big question, does this measure comply with the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution and the principle of equality before the law? And bottom line, racial preferences are wrong, no matter who they benefit. Campaign finance, supporters. a total of $13.3 million, and opponents $1 million. Look at your top supporters there and the one that we have listed for opponents. Bottom line, if you vote yes, yes means that Proposition 209, which bans the consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, etc., will be repealed. A no vote means that Proposition 209 will not be repealed, and our California Constitution will remain the same, which includes a current ban on consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public education, public employment, and public contracting. This requires a majority vote to pass. Proposition 17. This is a proposition related to criminal justice issues that have been a major concern in California for the last 10 years or more. And it relates to, in some cases, legislation that's been passed and now there's a referendum on it, or legislation that's been passed and people want it modified. So this Proposition 17 stands on its own. It restores the right to vote after completion of a prison term. The question, should people on state parole who are US citizens, residents of California, and at least 18 years old be able to vote? Background, the California Constitution does not allow persons in state prison or on parole to vote. Proposition 17 would change the state constitution to allow people on state parole to register and vote. What does it do? Proposition 17 allows parolees to vote, increases potential voters, changes the California state constitution. Fiscal effects, well, there'd be some initial county costs and one-time state costs to update cards and systems, and that would probably cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Supporters, look at the top supporters over here and the opponents. What do the supporters say? They say, parole by definition, it's not punishment. It is intended to help reintegrate people into the mainstream. Nearly 50,000 Californians who have completed their prison terms pay taxes at local, state, and federal levels, yet they're prohibited from voting. The removal of the right to vote is not based on an interest in public safety. Rather, it is rooted in a punitive justice system belief that intentionally attempts to rob marginalized people of their political power. What do the opponents say? They say this is a criminal injustice proposal. It will allow violent criminals to vote before completing their sentence. The people involved include murderers, voluntary manslaughterers, and rapists. An individual on parole has not regained the full trust of society at large, nor the privilege to participate as a full member of society. Campaign finance. You can see your top supporters. A total has been $841,000, and no financial amount was listed as of 9/20/20. Hasn't garnered a lot of opposition. Bottom line, yes vote means that people on parole for felony convictions will be allowed to register and vote. A no vote means people who are on parole for felony convictions will continue to be prohibited from voting. Requires a majority vote to pass. Proposition 18 amends the California Constitution to permit 17-year-olds limited voting rights. The question, shall the state constitution be amended to permit certain 17-year-olds to vote in any primary or special election that occurs before the next general election, subject to certain conditions? This might be a little bit confusing, but if you think back to our primary, which was in March, 17-year-olds could not vote in that, even if that 17-year-old was going to turn 18 in April. And then they'd be able to vote this November. This question is saying, if the 17-year-old is going to turn 18 before the general election, let them vote in the primary elections too. Currently, voters must be at least 18-year-olds on the date of an election to vote. This would change the state constitution. It would permit 17-year-olds to vote in any primary or special election prior to a general election if they are 18-year-old and otherwise eligible to vote. What it does, it allows some 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special election, increases the number of voters, changes the state constitution. Fiscal effects, initially there would be some fiscal effects, higher county costs to send voting materials, 100,000 to 1 million every 2 years, one-time state costs of about $100,000. Supporters, opponents, what do the supporters say? Young people eligible to vote in a general election, like we're going to have on November 3rd, but who turn 18 only after the primary special election are at a disadvantage. This proposition would provide full exposure to the election process prior to a general election. And it ensures that more citizens make well-formed voting decisions in a general election. Opponents say allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries on tax issues and debt issuance is not right because they have not paid taxes. They will be biased by who influences them. 17-year-olds are still considered children. Usually they are under the strong influence of their parents or even their teachers, and so they're not independent. Look at the supporters. A total raised of $380,000, and for the opposition, nothing was recorded as of 9/20. A yes vote means 17-year-olds who turn 18 prior to the next general election may vote in the primary or special elections. A no vote means the status quo remains, 17-year-olds are not eligible to vote, period. Proposition 19. This is another proposition about property taxes. We already dealt with one for Proposition 15. This is a different kind. It changes certain property tax rules. It's asking, shall we change California's property tax rules? Upon sale, this is the proposal, eligible homeowners who are over age 55, severely disabled, or victims of fire or natural disaster can transfer the assessed property tax value 3 times within their lifetime to a home of lesser or equal value anywhere in California, or can get a tax benefit with a more expensive home. It would reassess inherited homes at market value if it is not a primary residence. What's the background? What is the current law? Currently, when those same eligible homeowners, seniors over 55, severely disabled, or a victim of fire or natural disasters, can sell their primary residence once and transfer its assessed property value only once to a new home of less or equal value in the same county, or to one of the 10 counties that allow these transfers. California has 58 counties. When this property tax was first passed, all 58 counties would accept these transfers. Today, only 10 will, because of course, the receiving county will receive less property tax, so many of them do not wish to participate. What's the current law about heirs? Heirs always retain the property tax value of their inherited home. If you inherit a home, you keep its base tax property and you can keep it ad infinitum. Inherited farms get only limited benefits. What would this proposition do? So it would still be talking about when a primary residence is sold, only in this case, this targeted population could sell their home 3 times in a lifetime, and they can transfer their assessed property tax value to a home of lesser or equal value anywhere in California, or they can get a tax benefit with a more expensive home. This is the big difference. Many inherited homes to be reassessed at market value unless it is used as a farm or the primary residence of the heir, and they move in within 1 year of the parent passing away. Inherited farms retain prior tax value. Fiscal effects. This proposition does set up a special fund for prior protection. They claim will promote more revenue for local government, school, and fire protection, that there will be state savings on school funding and increased cost for counties. Who are the supporters and the opponents? Heavily supported by the California Association of Realtors and Professional Firefighters and Disability Rights, opposed by the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the Mercury News and East Bay Times editorial boards, and so on. What do the supporters say? They say this proposition expands Proposition 13 rules for homeowners who are seniors, wildfire victims, or people with disabilities, allowing the transfer of their home's property tax value to a replacement home anywhere in California. It closes the tax loophole on inherited properties. If they're not used as a primary residence, then they're going to be reassessed to market value. And it provides more funding for fire protection, emergency response, schools, and local government. What do the opponents say? The current tax code already provides for seniors over 55, those who are severely disabled, or those whose homes are destroyed by fire. The California Constitution was already amended 3 times to protect the right of families to pass their home and up to $1 million of other property to their heirs without changing the Proposition 13 tax assessment. This is called ballot box budgeting, and it limits the state's ability to determine how to spend discretionary funds, and they claim it will cause increased competition for smaller homes. Campaign finance, a total of $40.6 million has been raised to support this initiative, and a total of $45,000 has been raised to oppose it. The major supporters, you can see there, the California Association of Realtors, and the major opponent is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Bottom line, if you vote yes on this, it means eligible homeowners can transfer the assessed property tax value of their primary residence for a new home of lesser or equal value anywhere in California 3 times within their lifetime. Inherited homes that are used for rental or vacation will not be eligible for the lower property tax rate. They'll be reassessed. Inherited family farms will retain their lower property tax value. This, they claim, will provide more funding for schools, local governments, and firefighting. A no vote means no change in the current property tax rules. A very similar proposition was on the last ballot and was defeated back then. Proposition 20, another proposition regarding criminal justice issues. This is about criminal sentencing, parole, and DNA collection. The question here is basically, shall voters partially reverse these various assembly bills that were passed in 2011, 14, and 16? Should they change them by changing some parole eligibility, by reclassifying some misdemeanors as felony, and requiring DNA collection for specific misdemeanors? What's the background here? In 2011, the US Supreme Court ruling required California to reduce overcrowding to remedy the violation of prisoners' constitutional rights. There was a court case. The Supreme Court found that our prisons were overcrowded and were violating prisoners' constitutional rights. And various bills have been passed since then trying to address this issue. AB 109, one of the first ones passed in 2011, reduced the state prison population by transferring some prisoners to county government responsibility for incarcerating and paroling felons convicted of non-serious, non-violent, and non-sexual crimes. Background. Over the past 10 years, lawmakers and voters have reduced punishment for people convicted of some nonviolent crime. This has let some people out of prison earlier. The voters approved Proposition 47, which reclassified certain nonviolent, non-serious crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. And the voters also approved another Proposition, 57, which increased parole opportunities for felons convicted of nonviolent crimes and enabled judges to decide if juveniles should be tried as adults. These measures that have been passed in the past 10 years have brought the overall state prison population below 137.5% of capacity, as was ordered by the Supreme Court. But many individual prisons are still operating above that percentage. And they fear if this initiative passes that those populations will continue to increase. Supporters. Notice the supporters over here, meaning they want to change some of the current propositions that were passed, and opponents who do not want that to occur. What would Proposition 20 do? It would increase the severity of sentences for certain affected crimes. It would decrease parole eligibility, and it would increase the prison population at the state and county levels. Fiscal effects. There would be an increase in state and county costs due to increased prison population, tens of millions of dollars annually, and the DNA collection costs, which are several $million annually. What supporters say? Supporters who want this proposition to pass say 3 related impacts of recent laws must be fixed. Reform the parole system so violent criminals are not released, tighten post-release supervision, and increase penalties for violations. Reform theft laws to recognize serial and organized theft, and expand DNA collection from those convicted of drug, theft, and domestic violence related crimes. What do opponents say? Opponents say this proposition rolls back legislative and voter approved criminal justice reforms with extreme sentences and reduced resources for rehabilitation. The tens of millions of dollars that would be spent on prison if this proposition passes would be better invested in schools, homelessness, mental health, and affordable housing. People are demanding more changes to address past policies that disproportionately harm poor people and people of color. Proposition 20 takes us backward, not forward. Campaign finance. A total of $3.5 million has been raised in support of this proposition, $5.6 million in opposition. Look at the major donors in each section and ask yourself, why are these people supporting this, or organizations? Why are these people or organizations opposing it? What does it mean? Proposition 20, if you vote yes, those convicted of certain theft crimes, repeated shoplifting, for example, could receive increased penalties, longer jail terms. Additional factors will be considered in parole decisions, and DNA samples will be collected from adults convicted of certain misdemeanors. A no vote means the status quo will be maintained in sentencing and parole, and DNA samples will continue to be collected from adults arrested for a felony or those who are required to register as a sex offender or an arsonist. This requires a majority vote to pass. Proposition 21. This is a repeat of another measure that appeared on the last general election ballot. This is Local Rent Control Initiative. Another name, Rental Affordability Act. The question, should local governments be allowed to apply rent control on residential properties? The key word is local governments. What's the current status? Right now, there is limited local rent control. The Costa-Hawkins law, which passed in 1994, sets limits on the kind of rent control policies that cities and towns can impose. For example, they cannot apply to single-family homes. They can never apply to newly built housing since 1995 and can never say how much rent can be charged to a new renter moving in. That's the current law, state law. Rent control was prohibited except for older apartment buildings built before 1995. And vacancy control is prohibited. That's the current status. What would Proposition 21 do? It would basically make it okay for cities and counties to have rent control laws. People feel the state should not be controlling it, that local governments should be controlling it. Individuals with only 1 or 2 homes would be exempted from rent control, and the rent increases would be limited to 15% over the first 3 years. Fiscal effects: lower property taxes. Rental properties decline in value due to rent control. More sales tax. Renters can spend more money on other items rather than rent. And the net effect on state tax revenues is unclear. Supporters. Opponents. What do the supporters say? Supporters say this proposition helps tackle homelessness. It will provide stability for seniors and veterans. They don't have to worry about their rent increasing so fast and so quickly that they can't afford to stay there. They say local communities can limit rent increases and preserve affordable housing. They also feel that local governments are better in tune with their communities to make these decisions. And it still guarantees landlords a profit. What do the opponents say? They say Proposition 21 worsens the housing crisis because it lowers the incentives for developers to even build the housing. They claim rents will decrease only with changed zoning laws, reduced building costs, and permitting delays. And voters rejected a similar proposition in 2018, which is true. Campaign finance. Total of $24 million raised in support of this proposition. Look at the top ones. And opposition, a total of $53.4 million was raised in opposition to this proposition. A vote yes means cities and counties may control rents for housing older than 15 years. Exception, they can't on single-family homes owned by landlords with no more than 2 properties. Local governments may limit rent increases for new renters. A no vote means the status quo stays the same. Rent control is prohibited except for apartment buildings occupied before 2/1/1995. Landlords may raise rents for new tenants. Requires a majority vote to pass. Proposition 22, changes to employment classification rules for app-based drivers. The question, shall app-based transportation and delivery companies be exempt from providing employee benefits to certain drivers? What's the background here? In 2019, California Assembly Bill 5 was passed. It's known as AB 5. And what did that bill do? It defined criteria for classifying workers either as a contractor or an employee. Some companies continued to pay drivers as contractors, triggering state legal action because under this law, these drivers were to be considered employees, not contractors. Proposition 22 seeks to exempt transportation and delivery drivers from AB 5 and classify them as independent contractors. What would this do? It would classify these drivers as contractors, but they also agree to provide 120% of local minimum hourly wage. They will agree to provide some health insurance and income replacement if injured on the job, and some training. The fiscal effects, potential minor increase to state taxes paid if drivers' profits increase as lower cost per ride generates increased ridership. It's a complicated sentence. Who are the supporters? Lyft, these are the companies that are supporting this. Lyft, Uber, Postmates, etc. Who are the opponents? Joe Biden, Senator Kamala Harris, California Teachers Association. Again, why are these companies supporting it? Why are these people opposing it? What do the supporters say? They say this proposition protects the flexibility of app-based drivers have as an independent contractor. They claim it will protect thousands of jobs from elimination. It requires companies to provide some benefits to drivers, and it creates expanded public safety protections. What do the opponents say? Current law does not limit part-time driver flexibility. Furthermore, most drivers are not part-time and should receive AB's mandated employee benefits. Proposition 22 replaces employee benefits with lower earnings guarantee and healthcare subsidy. Proposition 22 is deceptive on background checks, which are already being done. Campaign finance, supporters. Look at again the companies that are supporting this, a total of $185 million in support of this proposition. Opposition, $12.1 million. Why are these people supporting it, or companies? Why are these people or companies or unions opposing it? What does it mean? A yes vote means that app-based transportation and delivery drivers will be classified as independent contractors, not employees, and will not get standard benefits. A no vote means that most workers, including drivers and app-based companies, will be classified as employees, because that's how they were defined in AB 5, and will be entitled to standard employee benefits and protections. Proposition 23, this is another repeat, the Dialysis Clinics Initiative. The question, shall dialysis clinics be required to have an on-site physician and to require permission by the state to close? A little bit of background here. About 72% of California dialysis clinics are owned by two companies, DaVita Kidney Care and Fresenius Medical Care. This labor union, SEIU, is a coalition of unions with about 80,000 healthcare worker members, and they have been trying to unionize DaVita and Fresenius since 2016. In 2018, same union placed Proposition 8 on the ballot. Proposition 8 would have had limited clinic profits, would have limited the clinic's profits to 15% above certain costs. That proposition failed. The union has returned to the ballot with this Proposition 23. Analysis, what does it require? Requires dialysis clinics to have a minimum of one physician on site. Requires consent from the California Health Department before closing a clinic, and forbids clinics to refuse treatment on the basis of who is paying, whether it's a private health insurance or a government mandated health insurance. Fiscal effects, costs for state and local government likely in the low tens of millions annually. Supporters, opponents. Supporters, you see that large labor union. Opponents, the owners of most of the dialysis clinics. What do the supporters say? They say dialysis is a dangerous procedure, and if something goes wrong, a doctor should be nearby. Proposition 23 is designed to ensure patients have access to dialysis treatment, particularly in rural communities. Proper reporting and transparency of infection rates encourages clinics to improve quality. The opponents say Proposition 23 would unnecessarily increase healthcare costs and make the doctor shortage worse. Proposition 23 will lead to clinic closures and cutbacks that will reduce access for patients and put their lives in jeopardy. And dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated. Campaign finance. A total of $6.2 million has been raised in support of this proposition. A total of $93.0 million have been raised or donated in opposition, mainly from the two companies that own most of the clinics. What does it mean? A yes vote. Dialysis clinics will be required to have an on-site physician, and they will need permission from the California Department of Health to close. A no vote means the current situation continues. No on-site physician is required. No state permission is required to close a clinic. This requires a majority vote to pass. Proposition 24, it amends consumer privacy laws. The question, shall voters, via the initiative process, change the provisions of the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, which just came into effect on January 1st, 2020, and create the California Privacy Protection Agency? So this Consumer Privacy Act passed in 2018. It was Assembly Bill 375, and this proposition is seeking to amend it. What is the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018? Effective this year, businesses storing personal information must disclose what personal information is collected and how it is used and sold. Consumers can request that businesses delete and or not share or sell their information. This proposition will create an agency, a regulatory agency, and will change some definitions of consumer rights, change which businesses are regulated, change some permission processes, and increase penalties to some businesses. What does Proposition 24 do? It creates this agency. It adds some restrictions on collecting and sharing of personal information, and it increases some penalties to businesses found in violation and authorizes civil penalties for theft of login information. Fiscal effects, increase in state costs of at least tens of millions of dollars annually, increased cost in the low millions of dollars annually for added court and Department of Justice enforcement workloads, and there's an unknown impact on tax revenues. Supporters, opponents. What do the supporters say? They say this proposition would prevent businesses from using or sharing sensitive data about your health, finances, race, ethnicity, and precise location. They claim a well-staffed agency will ensure consumer rights. It provides new definitions and protections to enhance consumer privacy rights. It says California's digital privacy rights can't be reversed by legislation. And they claim a voter-approved statewide initiative can only be overturned by another initiative. What do the opponents say? They say basically this proposition puts the burden on consumers to opt out of countless intrusive data collection processes, one by one, that companies are currently barred from by default. The opponents say changes advancing consumer rights are compromised by other changes which favor business interests. An important one, consumers opting out for privacy may be denied or even charged for some benefits. This is unfair and a burden to lower income users. Businesses can decide not to act if consumer requests require a disproportionate effort. And bottom line, voters should reject a complex 52-page initiative. You can look at the top supporters, and they've raised a total of $5.5 million. Opponents, just two listed, a total of $48,000 has been raised. Bottom line, a yes vote means a new state agency will be created. Consumer rights and business operations will be modified from the current legislation, and consumers and businesses will need to understand the new provisions and take action as necessary. A no vote means the existing California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 remains the in effect legislation. Proposition 25, which is the end of our state propositions. This is another Criminal Justice Reform Act, and it's about replacing cash bail with risk assessments referendum. What's the question? Should the cash bail system for detained suspects awaiting trials be replaced by risk assessments based on determination of public safety and flight risk? Background: in 2018, the legislature passed SB 10, which would do away with money bail system so that people arrested or arraigned in court might not have to post bail in order to stay free pending their trial. SB 10 did not go into effect because this referendum was filed. Paying bail allowed people to go free from pretrial jail. Voters need to decide either to keep bail for pretrial release or use this new system of risk assessment. What would this proposition do? It would basically implement SB 10, which means money bail would be replaced with a determination of public safety and flight risk by using a risk assessment tool, and it limits pretrial detention in jail. What are the fiscal effects? Excuse me. New state and local costs for these risk assessments, decrease county jail costs because not as many people would have to stay in jail awaiting trial. More sales taxes. Families can spend more if they're not having to pay for bail. And there's an unknown net impact on state and local tax revenues. Who are the supporters? Who are the opponents? What do the supporters say? They say the current system, a cash bail system, favors rich defendants who can easily make bail and keeps poor defendants and defendants of color in jail. Bail may allow defendants to go free regardless of the level of risk. A scientifically researched risk assessment system is an effective alternative to bail. And eliminating bail allows low and moderate risk defendants without financial means to remain free prior to trial. What do the opponents say? They say the intentions of SB 10 are good, but its provisions may effectively result in more people being jailed than under the current system. Government assessment is burdensome. This will generate more court hearings likely, thus more pretrial incarceration and fewer options for pretrial release. They question the reliability of the risk assessments, and they question whether there would be some racial bias in those risk assessment tools. Campaign finance, a total of $8.3 million for support of this proposition, and $6.0 million in opposition. Again, ask yourself, who are these people or organizations that are supporting it? Who are these people or organizations that are opposing it, and why? A yes vote means SB 10, which passed in 2018 and replaces the bail system with a risk assessment system for people awaiting trial, will be implemented. No one would be charged fees as a condition of release. A no vote means SB 10 will not be implemented and the current bail system will stay in effect for people awaiting trial. Okay, we are going to take a short 3-minute break. We will now move on to the Santa Clara County ballot measures. There are 3 of them for the residents of Santa Clara County. 2 of them affect everyone in the county, and 1 of them only certain people, certain residents. The first measure is known as Measure RR, and it's put on by the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Authority, CalTrain. It impacts all of Santa Clara County, and basically it is a sales tax increase. Here is an example of the question where there is a very long lead-in before you actually come to the question that's being asked. I'm not going to read the lead-in, but just the important part of the question. Basically asking, shall the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board's resolution levying a 30-year 1/8 cent sales tax with oversight and audits providing approximately $100 million annual for CalTrain that the state cannot take away, be adopted? A little background. The Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board, CalTrain, is an independent agency which is responsible for operations, capital projects, and planning for the 3-county train service on the San Francisco Peninsula. CalTrain's 3 funding partners are the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, the San Mateo County Transit District, and the City and County of San Francisco. Based on a formula that's determined by ridership, these 3 entities contribute approximately $30 million annually to CalTrain. The CalTrain Board of Directors has placed a proposed 1/8 cent sales tax increase on this ballot, which will impact the counties of San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara. This measure will need to be approved by 2/3 of the cumulative votes in the 3 counties in order to impose the increased sales tax. Fiscal effects. If this measure is approved, an additional 1/8 cent sales tax will be imposed for the next 30 years on San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara County. It will generate approximately $100 million per year. And the revenue collected will cover the annual $30 million contributions that used to come from those other 3 organizations, and will provide roughly $60 to $70 million per year for the infrastructure repair and maintenance. Notice the supporters. Notice the opponents. What do the supporters say? They say this measure is vital. This funding will save CalTrain from shutdown and preserve CalTrain services for thousands of essential workers such as nurses, teachers, and first responders. It protects CalTrain as affordable and reliable transit. It will fund systems improvements, providing faster and more frequent trains and cleaner, quieter trains to reduce noise and air pollution. It will reduce travel time and provide better all-day, all-week service and better connections. And it will have the required financial accountability. What do the opponents say? The opponents say CalTrain ridership may not recover following the loss during COVID-19. Riders who are mostly higher income can continue to work remotely, and some riders may be concerned about the risks of using public transportation in the future. Low and middle income earners and the unemployed cannot afford adding yet another regressive sales tax at this time, let alone one that will last for 30 years. The existing transportation sales taxes can fund CalTrain at its current service level. The proposed sales tax will raise $100 million a year, netting an additional $70 million a year for CalTrain, and an additional $30 million for the other transit agencies because they won't have to donate it to CalTrain. Supporters and finance, we don't have any data on this. What does a yes vote mean? An additional 1/8 cent sales tax will be imposed on San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties for the next 30 years. No vote means current sales tax rates will remain in effect. Again, it needs a 2/3 vote of the cumulative total from each county to pass. The next measure, Santa Clara County measure measure is put on by the Santa Clara Valley Water District. It serves all 15 cities in Santa Clara County. It's a parcel tax. It's an extension of a current parcel tax. It needs a 2/3 vote to pass. The question, shall the measure, this measure, to renew the Safe, Clean Water and Natural Flood Protection Program, which ensures public health and safety by protecting water supply, by reducing pollution, by providing flood protection, by renewing the Santa Clara Valley Water District's existing parcel tax without increasing rates, averaging 0.006 per square foot annually, as described in this resolution, until ended by voters, raising approximately $45 million annually. There are senior exemptions, annual audits, and independent citizen oversight. Basically asking you, shall the current parcel tax remain in effect indefinitely? Background. This measure seeks to renew the Safe, Clean Water and Natural Flood Protection Program. Voters approved the existing parcel tax in 2012 for a 15-year term, which would end in 2028. The prior two measures approved by voters included a sunset clause, which is an ending date. This measure proposes to renew the parcel tax without a definitive end date. Fiscal effects. If it passes, the current parcel tax rate will continue, but without a definitive end date. The measure will raise approximately $45 million annually. Supporters and opponents. Supporters, opponents. What do the supporters say? They say vote yes on Measure S to protect our local supply of safe, clean water. Measure S funds needed improvements to protect our local water infrastructure and supply. Measure S does not increase taxes. It simply renews existing local funding. It continues work that is already being done countywide. Every penny will be spent locally. Measure S requires independent citizen oversight and audits to ensure funds are spent as promised. Measure S provides an exemption for senior and low-income citizens. What do the opponents say? Measure S proposes to renew the current tax, but without a definitive end date. Over $300 million in bonds will be issued with repayments, including interest and banking fees totaling about $650 million. Taxpayers will give about $350 million to investors and bankers. This renewal does not expire in 15 years. And the Safe Clean Water's Independent Monitoring Committee is appointed by the board, calling into question its independence. Restoring wildlife habitat, one of the priorities from 2012, has been underfunded and would be further reduced under this measure. Bottom line, there already is secure funding until 2028. There is no need to rush to enact a new tax now. All current projects have funding under the existing tax. Supporters and opponents, data was not available. Bottom line, a yes vote means that the existing parcel tax will continue, but without a definitive end date until voters rescind it. A no vote means the current parcel tax will continue until 2028. Needs a 2/3 vote to pass. The next measure is put on by the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, referred to as OSA. This only impacts those cities or towns that have designated open space areas. For example, in our league's coverage area, we cover 4 cities, but only Campbell would be impacted by this. This is another parcel tax extension and requires 2/3 vote. What is the question? Shall the measure to renew Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority's existing $24 annual parcel tax with no increase generating approximately $8 million annually until ended by voters with oversight audits be adopted. Little background, existing law. Measure Q, a Santa Clara County Open Space Authority parcel tax, was on November 4th, 2014, that ballot, and was approved by the voters. It actually generated a 67.9% positive vote. Measure Q authorized the Santa Clara County Open Space Authority to levy a tax of $24 per parcel annually for 15 years. The tax was designed to produce an estimated $8 million per year in additional revenue for the Open Space Authority. On July 23rd, 2020, the Open Space Authority voted unanimously to place this measure on the ballot, which is an extension of the current parcel tax, but with no ending date. Effects. If it passes, the expected revenue is $8 million per year, which is approximately 2/3 of the operating budget. The ballot measure asking for a renewal of the existing annual parcel tax with no increase, no sunset clause, with oversight and audits will be enacted. And the sunset clause that was on the original ballot measure has been removed. Supporters. Opponents. What do the supporters say? The parcel tax money is a fundamental part of OSA budget. Measure Q funds are not earmarked since they provide 2/3 of the OSA's revenues and are unrestricted. Many times parcel taxes are passed to fund particular projects. That's not the case with the OSA. The money provides 2/3 of their operating budget. Removal of the sunset clause ensures that OSA has adequate funding for long-term planning and program execution. It does provide for citizen oversight. Their responsibilities, the OSA's responsibilities, are increasing, and the need for the parcel tax funds, therefore, are also increasing. Long-term parcel tax funding is necessary to provide the revenues that are sufficient and flexible enough to meet their increasing responsibilities. The parcel tax funds provide local matching to help OSA attract public and private grants. And with increased public visits to their properties, consistent funding is needed for additional public access. What do the opponents say? Low and middle income earners and the unemployed cannot afford to add a regressive parcel tax at this time, let alone one scheduled to run forever. They claim more open space means less room for housing. Less room for housing means the demand for available land on which to build housing becomes scarce, which in turn drives up the price of land and obviously the housing built on it. Over 1.5 million Californians have left the state in the last decade, primarily due to the extremely high cost of living here. Taxes are killing California by driving businesses and those that they employ out of the state. No available data on campaign finance. Bottom line, a yes vote means that the current parcel tax of $24, but without a sunset clause, will remain in effect until voters rescind it. A no vote means the current parcel tax will remain in effect until it sunsets in 2030. Needs 2/3 to pass. And now we're moving on to 3 local measures. 2 of them are for Los Gatos residents only, and 1 of them is for residents of the Campbell Union High School District only. The first measure, Measure A, is a proposal to establish a town finance commission. What is the question? Shall the measure proposing an ordinance replacing the town's current finance commission and sales tax oversight committee with a finance commission be adopted? A little bit of background. Los Gatos currently has a finance committee and a sales tax oversight committee. 5 members, 2 town council members, and 3 residents. Town council members vote. The 3 residents are advisory only. Los Gatos currently maintains a AAA rating but it was noted the outstanding pension costs were noted in the report. Likely effects if this measure passes. Measure A would amend the Los Gatos Town Code to disband both the existing Finance Committee and the Sales Tax Oversight Committee, and instead establish a Finance Commission consisting of 7 members, 5 voting citizen members and 2 non-voting council members. Each council member would appoint 1 citizen appointee. Here's a list of supporters. And you see 2 registered opponents. Campaign finance data was not available on 9/7. What do the supporters say? They say the Los Gatos Town Council could benefit from expert financial and operating advice provided by 5 highly qualified town residents with significant private sector experience. Town and government spending by the town increased by 72% between 2015 and 2019. We need to pass this measure to improve our financial oversight and get our fiscal house in order. What do the opponents say? All town financial matters would first need review by the new commission, with suggestions accepted or rebutted before going to the council for action, creating an unacceptably slow process. Commission members would be appointed for 4 years with accountability to no one. All other commissions are established by the council and updated as needs change. This commission could only be modified by voters passing a new measure, greatly limiting governance flexibility. And corporate executives are obligated to seek profits for shareholders. Our town's stakeholders aren't after financial returns. Town policy must reflect the diversity of our stakeholders' interest and never be profit-driven, or as the initiative puts it, to maximize fee generation. Bottom line, yes vote. The town's current Finance Committee and Sales Tax Oversight Committee will be replaced with a Finance Commission that would be required to review and advise the town council before any action on financial, budgetary, and investment matters as the town council directs. A no vote means the town's current Finance Committee and Sales Tax Oversight Committee will continue to attend to all of the above activities. The next local measure B, is about term limits. Term limits for town council members. Shall there be term limits for Los Gatos Town Council members, limiting them to serve only 2 consecutive 4-year terms? And if someone wants to come back on the council after their 2nd term, they would have to wait 4 years and then they could apply again. Background. The town council consists of 5 members, each elected by voters to serve a 4-year term. Currently, the town does not impose term limits. If Measure B is approved, no person who has served 2 consecutive 4-year terms will be permitted to seek nomination or election for a new term until he or she has been off the council for 4 years. Effects. If it passes, an ordinance would be adopted limiting the number of consecutive terms a member could serve on the town council, thereby establishing term limits. The term limit would be 2 consecutive 4-year terms. After the 2 terms, a person could seek nomination for a new term only after he or she has stayed off the council for 4 years. Supporters. No registered opponents. What supporters say? Term limits increase voter choice by making elections more competitive and allow more candidates to hold office. Without term limits, incumbents may become entrenched politicians who can forget the people they were elected to serve. Of the other 14 cities in Santa Clara County, 12 have enacted some form of term limits. And due to a lack of term limits and the advantages of incumbency since 2001, only 13 citizens have served on the 5-person Los Gatos Town Council. Shouldn't more residents have an opportunity to serve? Opponents, there were no registered arguments. There was no information about campaign finance. Measure B, bottom line, a yes vote. Term limits will be imposed on the Los Gatos Town Council members as follows. No person shall serve more than 2 consecutive 4-year terms. 4 years must elapse before a person can serve again. A no vote means there will be no limits on the town council members' length of service. The next local measure is for the Campbell Union High School District. It's a parcel tax, and it's another extension of a parcel tax. This is only for the residents who reside within the Campbell Union High School District attendance area. Basically, it's asking, shall the Campbell Union High School District measure be adopted, renewing an existing $85 annual parcel tax that can be ended by voters, providing approximately $4 million annually, exempting senior and qualified disabled citizens, subject to oversight, annual audits, and local control. Background. Measure L does not raise taxes. It simply renews an existing local school funding. These funds cannot be taken by the state. Since 2005, the funds have supported the academic programs. And voters in our district have renewed a special parcel tax assessment of $85 in 2013 for 8 years, known as Measure E. The tax expires at the end of fiscal year 2022-2023. If this passes, residential real properties within the Campbell Union High School District will continue to pay this renewed parcel tax until the voters rescind it. Notice the supporters and the opponents. Supporters. They say the Campbell Union High School District has earned an AAA bond rating due to their proven track record of spending taxpayer dollars carefully and responsibly. Measure L simply renews the existing local school funding parcel tax of $85. None of the funds can be used to increase administrator salaries, benefits, or pensions. An independent citizens oversight committee will continue to ensure that the funds are spent as promised. Seniors 65 and older are exempted, and the Campbell Union High School District has made stellar academic gains over the past decade. What opponents say, this is not the time for taxation as usual. School districts need to do their fair share by focusing their efforts on controlling costs and by prioritizing only the most essential things. The budget assumptions behind proposals like this are no longer valid. With fewer students doing fewer things, asking for approval of a tax like this is the wrong approach. And bottom line, there is a reason that parcel taxes are usually approved for a limited number of years. It's so voters will have a chance to reconsider them if the situation has changed. Campaign finance, no available data. Bottom line, yes vote. Residential and commercial real properties within the Campbell Union High School District attendance area will continue to pay an annual parcel tax of $85 with no sunset clause. That means no ending date. A no vote means the current parcel tax, $85, will remain in effect until it sunsets at the end of fiscal year 2022-2023. And that brings us to the close of this pros and cons presentation. Attendees, we would like to thank you for your attendance. We hope that you have learned a lot today that will help you with your decision making. The League would also like to remind everyone to vote by November 3rd, 2020. We are so lucky here in Santa Clara County, and actually the whole of California, now that every registered citizen is able to vote by mail. You will be receiving your mail-in ballot in early October and can vote by completing your ballot and mailing it back in the provided postage paid envelope, completing your ballot and dropping it off at any secure vote box located throughout the county, or you can visit a vote center to drop off your ballot, to vote in person, to get a replacement ballot if needed, and even to register to vote conditionally on that day. The last day to vote is November 3rd, 2020. Remember to vote and vote early. Listed below are a number of nonpartisan election information organizations that we encourage you to look at as you're making your decisions. The League of Women Voters of California, Ballotopedia, Easy Voter Guide. This you can download from the League of Women Voters of California website. It comes in, I believe, 6 different languages. You can download and print a copy for yourself in the language of your choice. And in particular, we recommend the Santa Clara County Register of Voters. Again, download the League of Women Voters of California voter guides in many languages. Voter's Edge, an excellent website to check out your personal ballot. You enter your address and your zip code and a copy of your personal ballot comes up. You can go in and see all the candidates. You can look at all the measures, read the pros and cons, and Ballotopedia is also another excellent resource. Remember, the last day to vote is November 3rd, 2020. Vote early. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. This concludes this forum.